In this lesson, we will add a camera and a null object to use as a control. Okay, so for this lesson, I want to go back out to our main composition. So go ahead and go over there now. And I'm going to be adding a camera. So what I need to do now is change my layers to 3D layers. I could do this later on after I add the camera, but I want you to be able to see the change that occurs when the camera and the null object are added together. So we'll go ahead and definitely turn on the 3D switch for our shape layers. And remember, we were wanting to turn on those motion blur layers as we're working as well. So you can go ahead and turn on that switch. And the circle layer, we're going to turn that on for the circle number banner layer, and the millions and a videos viewed. So all of those layers. Now I'm not going to be turning on the 3D switch for my background layer because I don't want the camera to move around that layer. I want it to look like that's always there and all the objects in front of it are 3D layers. So we'll just leave that one as it is. So your setup should look like this, where you have these 5 3D layers kind of sandwiched in between these 2 layers that we haven't changed that for. And I'm obviously not changing the swatches layer to 3D because we're only using that as a reference. Okay, so now let's go ahead and add our camera. So come up here to Layer, New, Camera, and we're just going to use the default settings that our camera comes with for now. So go ahead and say OK to that. And you see that this pink camera layer has been added. Now, I could go ahead and use some of the built-in camera animation tools at this point. So I'm going to go ahead and show you what those are. And the camera comes with lots of built-in tools for animating it, but it can sometimes produce really crazy and unwanted results. So adding that null object usually is a little bit easier for control, but I still want you to be able to see what these controls are. So if you come up here where you see this camera tool, and I hold that down, we see that we have the unified camera tool, the orbit camera tool, the track XY camera tool, and the track Z camera tool. So now that we've learned a little bit about 3D layers, you probably can guess what the X, Y, and Z tracks can do. The orbit camera tool is going to be a lot like changing the orientation of a layer. So whenever we were changing the orientation of our layers earlier, by going in that snowflakes comp and changing them, you could see how those layers would rotate. So now, because we're rotating the camera itself, it appears that all of our layers are rotating as I'm dragging this rotation around. Now, if I come back up here and grab the Track XY camera tool, I can simply move backwards, forwards, and up and down. And then if I grab that Track Z camera tool, I can move in and out. Now, these tools can be really helpful if you just want to do something really specific. But sometimes when you want to have a really versatile tool, using the null is definitely easier. And the unified camera tool is going to really just be all of those tools put into one, and you use all 3 buttons on your mouse. So if you left click, you'll be using the orbit tool. Right clicking is going to give you the Track Z tool, and then a middle click, which is sometimes hard to do because sometimes you accidentally push the wheel itself. The middle click is going to give you the X and Y track tool. So you are able to access all the camera tools without having to go up here and toggle between them with the buttons. So I'm going to go ahead and undo those. And if you don't want to Control Z through all of those buttons, you can come down here and where you see the transform on the camera, go ahead and just hit reset, and that's going to put that back exactly where it was before. So now I want to add the layer to use as a control, and the layer is going to be a null. So come up here and go to Layer, New, Null Object. And you want to make sure that you change that null object to a 3D layer, just as we did earlier. So we'll parent our camera to that null. And whenever you parent the camera to the null, you're essentially saying, from now on, I want to set all the keyframes for animation that I'll be doing with my camera on my null object, just the same as we did whenever we were setting up that null as the position control for our snowflakes. So go ahead and grab the pick whip on the camera and drag it up there to the null's name. And now we have a camera parented to our null object. So I can grab my selection tool now, And it's just a little bit easier to move around with this null because now I have the controls right in front of me and I'm able to simply do all of the same things I was doing before with the camera tools, but I just have this easier to use control right there. So I'm going to undo some of those movements. And now what I want to do is add an animation with this null object where once these circles kind of come in here and move around this larger circle, I want the camera to pull back. So let's go ahead and see where those keyframes are on the shape layer. So select any one of those. And if you're not sure what kind of keyframe that you set on a layer, but you know that you set some keyframes and you want to see all the keyframes you've set on a layer, instead of trying to hit the actual keyboard shortcut for that property, you can just hit the U key and it's going to bring up all the keyframes you've set on that property. So that's really helpful to me if I don't remember that I changed the position and maybe I had done it some other way. So now I see the position property has been brought up and I can see where this keyframe is. So I want to set my nulls keyframe at the same point as this position keyframe for that shape layer. So I'm going to grab my null and we'll hit the P key to bring up the position of the null. And we'll just go ahead and set our position stopwatch right there. Then I'm going to move forward to about 9.5 seconds. And I'll grab that Z axis and we can just pull our null backwards towards us. Now, I may have undone it just a few too many times, so our null was no longer, or our camera was no longer parented to our null. So you can just go ahead and do that again right there. And then we can just pull that camera back so that we can see everything inside of our composition a little bit better, because before it was really getting kind of cramped and it was hard to read what any of that was saying. So I'm going to pull back just about to this point right here and maybe even push the null up just a little bit. So it's not pushing backwards in a perfect line, it's kind of pushing back and up just so that this is better centered. Now, I don't really want to be able to see that of video's view piece of text anymore. So we have this transitioning out at that point, but because we've turned that into a 3D layer, I can still see it once my camera pushes back. So you see how that happens there. What I can do is just at this point, after it's transitioned out and before it transitions back in, because my null object moves, we can clip that layer. So let me show you how to do that. If we just come down here, and I'll actually do it for both the millions and the of videos viewed layers just to make this a little bit easier. Go ahead and select both of those layers. And the long way to do this is to come over here and grab the edge of these layers and bring them back, dragging them to the current time indicator. But the way that I like to do it is just using the Alt bracket keyboard shortcut. So you can hold the Alt key down and use the close bracket, and that's just going to trim that layer to wherever your current time indicator is. And alternatively, if you want to clip it on the other end at the beginning, you can hold Alt and hit the open bracket, and we see that that'll clip it on the left side. So quick little way for you to start clipping your layers, a lot easier than dragging those. So now we have this pretty interesting animation that we've created just by animating that null object backwards and up a little bit. Now we can see everything that we have in that composition. So in this lesson, we learned how to do a simple Z-space camera movement using a null object, and we also learned how to use those built-in camera tools inside of After Effects.